Thank you. Thank you so much, Pam. And hi, everyone. Hi, Milwaukee friends. It's good to be with you. I, as a very generous introduction, Pam, um, I do a lot of things in my job now. And I wanted just to tell you a little bit about my current work with the Adalah Justice Project. Adalah in Arabic means justice. So we're Justice Project. You can't say it too many times. We are the outgrowth of the Adalah Legal Center's US work. The Adalah Legal Center is a Palestinian legal organization based in Haifa. They've been doing strategic litigation since 1996, defending Palestinians in Israeli courts. That sounds crazy, right? But they do strategic litigation means that they are really trying to expose, right, the inconsistencies inside the state of Israel that claims, right, to be at one moment a democracy while maintaining, Jewish supremacy in the land. So that's how we got our start. We are now a completely separate organization. We are doing work that is not legal. We don't think that people in the US listen to human rights language, unfortunately. US exceptionalism expands in that regard to thinking that international law doesn't apply here. So we do our work in a very different way. And it's a way that I think many of you are familiar with, and that we say that Palestine is not an exception. And what do I mean by that? We mean that if you are a progressive, you believe in social justice, that Palestine can't be, the thing that you keep off of that agenda. So, for example, you can't be against the wall at the southern border of the US, but then justify the siege of Gaza, where 2 million people are caged because they happen to be the wrong ethnicity, refugees that were forced out of their homes in 1948. 80% of the Gaza Strip, are refugees. Their villages are just miles over that barrier fence. The Palestine exception, ending the Palestine exception means you can't stand up against the Muslim ban, Trump's Muslim ban, and then in the same breath, support Israel's ban of Palestinians from returning home, or Palestinian Americans like myself, born in this country, presenting myself at the airport in Tel Aviv and being told, you need to sit in this room, questioned 5-6 times, wait 8 hours, and then finally be deported back home because you're not Jewish, and have the US embassy say, we can do nothing to help you because you're not Jewish. So the US embassy adopting the same logics, right, of exclusion. Ending the Palestine exception also means that, you can't say that you're for free speech and then be silent when state legislatures, when the executive branch of the government and Congress, eventually they may get to it, calls for BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, to be illegal or to be limited, or to conflate, right, to conflate advocacy for Palestinian rights, very basic rights, with anti-Semitism. So that's writ large what we're trying to do. We're trying to say Palestine can't be off your agenda as a progressive. But in the same way, we're also saying to our own communities, Palestinian communities here in the US, that you can't exceptionalize Israel. Israel is not the only settler colonial state. Palestinians are not at the top of the hierarchy, or if we're going to have an oppression Olympics, we don't win. There are no medals in oppression. We understand as Palestinians living on this land that we also are colonizers, that we are part of a settler colonial project, and that we want people to understand that, we are, as an anti-colonial struggle, the Palestinian struggle has always been an anti-colonial struggle that our goal is decolonization, and that means we have to be consistent. We really are standing for the return of lands here as well. And that means, a lot of different things. And as we do our work, we build solidarity with Indigenous people that are struggling for land back in this country. It means that we stand together with the Black struggle, and we call for the abolition of the police. And we say that racial justice can't have borders, and that we extend that idea beyond US borders. And we're really thinking about what does it mean to not only abolish the police, but abolish all the systems of harm, including the military, and ending US funding to Israel. So, that's where we are. So we work at the grassroots level, working with partners that share our vision of joint liberation. And then we also work at the congressional level. And I'm just going to, if it's okay with you, and I think I have access, I'd like to share one slide with you just to illustrate where we see some openings. Okay, let's see if I can do this. Okay, so this is a Pew Research poll that was taken in 2018. You'll see, I think the graph that's most interesting is the one on the right-hand side, where you see that from 1978 to 2018, Pew has been polling Republican and Democratic voters about a simple question. In the dispute between Israel and the Palestinians, who do you sympathize with more? And you can see that, in 1978, the numbers were pretty equal. A slighter percentage, higher percentage of Republicans said, we sympathize with Israel more, but it was very close, within a few percentage points. That trend continues, right? Until we hit, and we get to about 20, really in the 2010s, that we see a shift, a remarkable shift of democratic support for Israel on the downturn. And a lot of that has to do with what I've been talking about, this growing realization that Israel is not a progressive force in the world, a growing understanding that the myth of Israeli democracy has been a myth, and a growing understanding of the foundations of the US. I think a growing consciousness, really caused a lot by the uprisings, Black uprisings that we're all familiar with. I live here in St. Louis, and the Ferguson uprising in 2014 had a huge impact on the way that people in this city began to approach organizing for social justice. And Palestine became part of that conversation. There's no coalition in the city that can go forward without talking about Palestinian rights as part of a larger framework of what we're trying to accomplish here in this city. So an end to militarism and ending US military aid to Israel. So I just wanted to share that. Obviously, Cori Bush, who is our newly elected representative, comes from the Ferguson movement and became friends with people, doing work, Palestinians doing work in Ferguson. So, it's no coincidence that when she was attacked for her stances on BDS on the eve of her primary this past summer, that she didn't back down, because she felt very secure in her understanding of what Palestine means. And so we're working with, people like Cori Bush, we're working with the squad that's growing to just continue to create this divide, and hopefully to continue to, bring consciousness to democratic voters that Israel doesn't stand for their values. So it's that simple. And I'll leave it at that, and we can get into more conversation about how we do that.
Thank you, Sandra. Yes, we'll have some discussion after our speakers. And I was hoping Janan could speak next, and Julie would just like to do a little introduction. She's a good friend of Janan's for quite a long time.
Thank you. Actually, I remember the very first time that I met Janan. She and her family, the Adalah family, who are renowned in this community for their work for Palestinian causes and for social justice. They were attending one of the events that Peace Action, at that time known as Mobilization for Survival, was presenting on the issue of Palestine. This was in the early 1980s when our organization, Peace Action, then Mobilization for Survival, took up this cause as part of our work and had many speakers that we brought into the community that were from Palestine. And we had study groups on the Middle East and dialogues that were going on. Our family was always a part of this. It was a wonderful beginning of a long friendship. And since then, Janan has become really the leading spokesperson for the Muslim community in this city, and has educated so many people, not only on Islam, but on Muslim culture and on the Palestinian culture. And so it's really a pleasure to have known her and to be able to introduce her this evening. Janan.
Thank you so much, Julie. And Julie is a mentor. She's really a giant here in the city, and so, you know, you really have always led these causes, and we stand on your shoulders. So thank you so much for that very kind introduction. I actually was basically, you know, asked to sort of respond and just to kind of give my thoughts as well. And as Julie, as you mentioned, I come from a Palestinian family. I was born in El Bire, although I came when I was very young. But we grew up, as you know, we lived and we breathed Palestine. My mother always cooked the food. If there was a wedding, she always dressed in the national costume and outfits of the Palestinian people. There wasn't an event that we went to, a cultural event that we were not taught to be incredibly proud, and we would really highlight the rich culture of our heritage. And I think that that's what's so important. The things that I kind of wanted to talk about, just sort of pivoting from what Sandra has so eloquently talked about, and the work that Adalah does, which is wonderful. What I wanted to really discuss is, again, the importance of defining and owning the narrative. I think that for so long, Palestinians have, to some extent, allowed others to sort of create the narrative about them. You know, to the point that we frankly didn't recognize ourselves at times in the other struggles and the other causes. And I think that this Black Lives Matters, just the resurgence and the understanding that's come about, has really mobilized a lot of groups, and has forced people to take a deep dive into thinking about how they have been framing their issues. And if the last 4 years has taught us anything at all, it really is that you know, as people that believe in justice, it's really not even about Palestinians and those you know, and I hate words like settlers, whatever, that's such an innocuous word, you know, it's like Palestinians and anti-Palestinians, you know what I mean? We need to define things according to what we know to be true. We shouldn't allow the other definitions to others people to define us. And so I think that what we have come to the realization, especially with the issues that have happened in Ferguson and all of you know, all of the issues at our borders with the Mexicans, it's really those that believe in justice and those that do not believe in justice, or believe that you know, God loves them best, or believes that, you know, that they have somehow you know, a monopoly on God's grace, so to speak, and everyone else is outside this particular parameter. And I feel that for a long time, Palestinians were sort of fighting on their own, so to speak. Yes, they had allies, but many times it was a Palestinian issue, or it was an Arab issue, or it was a Muslim issue. But no, this is an issue of justice, and all those that believe in justice. And Sandra said it so eloquently. The idea is you cannot say that people that are in cages at the southern border, that you're going to turn a blind eye to that, or you're going to turn a blind eye to the Palestinians that are in cages in Gaza. It's all the same. Or the Rohingya, or the Uyghurs, or, you know, justice is justice. And so the sooner we are able to be part of this global kind of movement of all those that believe in just causes wherever they are, and will stand up against oppression wherever it is, the more chance that we have to be successful. You know, I think about the things that happened with Trump. The idea that he goes and he just basically says that, yes, you know, go ahead, annex the Golan Heights. You can have those. Who the heck are you to say something like that, you know? And so, and there's this kind of silence out there. There's this dead silence. And why? Because again, it's, for many people, it's not their cause. They don't see it as their cause. But we have to more and more really stand together and identify with each other and help each other to understand the different conflicts that are there. You know, I didn't know much about the Uyghurs. Yes, they're Muslim, you know, minority, but I didn't know hardly anything about the Uyghurs until I find that they're put in concentration camps. We really, and unfortunately, there are so many issues and so many causes out there, but we really need to familiarize ourselves, and we need to stand together, because I think that the more we can show that it's not about, you know, one cause, it's about, this is a principle. This is a principle that we stand for, and regardless of who does it. And I have to go back to, again, you know, and Julie, you mentioned it, and many of you know me, that I'm a proud Palestinian. I'm also a proud Muslim. And so one of the verses in the Quran is that, you know, you're required to stand for justice, even if you have to stand against yourself or against your family. You stand for justice, which means that justice is justice. You cannot pick and choose. And I think that that's really what I'm hoping as we're moving forward, especially as we start to see more and more young American Jews that are embarrassed, that really do not want to be identified with what they're seeing happening in Israel, even though they might have grown up a certain, a particular way. So we need to basically join forces. We need to work together. We need to stand for what is just. Even, and if there's someone that's doing something that's unjust from amongst us, you know, I'm the first person to stand out and say Saudi Arabia is a tyrannical government. You know, this is a corrupt government. They do not represent us. We need to be able to do that. We need to be able to stand up, and regardless of who these people are, and say that this is just and this is unjust. And if we can all kind of work together and ally together in the same way that with the Black Lives Matters, or we saw, you know, just huge numbers of people finally say enough is enough. I really think that in spite of all of the different research, in spite of what everyone is saying, I really think that change can come. And you know, the Pew research that Sandra mentioned, I think that's very interesting. The fact that there is now, before, you know, you couldn't get anybody in Congress to say anything against Israel. Now you're really seeing this division between Democrats and Republicans. And you know, that's powerful. That's powerful, because now more and more people are standing up for what they realize they just cannot hide under the rug anymore. And so I want to tell you that in spite of, you know, how things may look, it's in spite of the suffering that I know, because I still have relatives in Palestine, immense suffering that is going on there. I really am feeling confident. I feel confident. It's not going to happen in 1 year. It's not going to happen in 2 years. It might take 10 years, you know, or more. But the point is, we are moving in that direction if we accept to define our narrative, and we accept that we are going to stand together for justice wherever it is. And those are just my thoughts today.
Oh, thank you so much, Janan. That was amazing. I really appreciate what you have, your words. And so we're going to move on. And before we have a little discussion, Sandy Pasch is going to speak with us. And she's a member of the Jewish Voice for Peace Legislative Leadership Committee. And she was in the Wisconsin State Assembly in 2009 to 2015. She's from Milwaukee and educated at the University of Wisconsin. And she was a nursing retired. She's a retired professor of psychiatric nursing. So we'd love to hear from you, Sandy.
Oh, thank you. I'm really honored to be part of this group. And Janan, what you said about young Jewish people just really resonates, because I'm, a member of Jewish Voice for Peace. It's a 25-year-old organization, but I'm relatively new. It's only been 4 or 5 years that I've been involved, and it was because my daughter got me involved. I was a strong activist, known for it in my work in government for social justice, and really went to town on it. But the Palestinian issue wasn't on my radar until my daughter brought it to me. And I'm ashamed that it took this long, but I'm very glad that she did, because I'm rather passionate about it right now. JVP did start over 25 years ago as grassroots. We believe that grassroots, you form relationships. Through relationships, you start moving people, and you start moving attitudes. And a lot of attitudes do need to be moved in the Jewish community. We need huge global system changes to bring about the justice and to change the injustice that's happening in Israel. JVP is intergenerational, and I so appreciate the young voices and the young energy and the wisdom from people older than me and everybody in between. We come together, and it's multiracial, and we work in close partnerships with a lot of allies across a broad spectrum that are also committed to social justice, both for Palestinians and in the United States. And the American exceptionalism in that, and the Israeli exceptionalism, it's just so true. And it's been so true when I talk to legislators, and it really rings home brings back the work that we have to do. We're dedicated to supporting and leading winnable campaigns to change United States policy and the discourse that will allow the Palestinian and Israelis to achieve a just and lasting peace, but one that's on a fair level. It can't be one-sided. It has to be peace and equality and justice for Palestinians and not just Jews. We formed in a big way to be a voice saying that whatever Israel says is not okay with all Jews, that Israel does not represent all Jews, that they do not speak for all Jews, that a huge growing number of us are saying this has to stop. What the Israel government is doing is unjust, it's cruel. What they're doing to children, what they're doing with the annexation, their total disregard for law, the apartheid in healthcare, everything that they're doing. And yet the United States continues to fund their military to the tune of over $3.8 billion a year. And so recently, Jewish Voice for Peace formed a C4, and I'm also part of that. It's the Jewish Vote for Peace Action. We complement JVP. We bring those grassroots to the halls of power. We used to have in-person lobby days, now we do virtual ones, and we try to organize with phone calls and letters and as many voices as we can to our elected officials to know that their constituents support justice for Palestinians. The fact that we send $3.8 billion in military funding every year, but so many of our US politicians consistently refuse to hold Israel accountable on how they use the funds, that we have Palestinian families living under the military blockade of Gaza, the military's abuse of arrest and detention of children across the West Bank, the cruel, devastating home demolitions, the extrajudicial killings, the unequal system of oppression against Palestinians. It has to stop. So what we're doing is pushing for proactive legislation. And again, we do this with JVP and JVPA. We demand the Israeli government be accountable for their occupation and apartheid. And ultimately, we want to end all funding. So right now we're pushing for legislation that might get us there. One example is the bill that Representative Betty McCollum has introduced for the past 2 legislative sessions, and we anticipate that she will again in the next weeks or months. The no way to treat a child legislation that goes against what the Israeli military does to Palestinian children. Both times it was supported by Mark Pocan, a representative from Wisconsin who represents more of the Southwest and Central Wisconsin. We have not been able to get my representative, my good friend whom I dearly love, but Representative Gwen Moore has not been willing to sign on to it. And again, it's that progressive except for Palestine issue that we're really needing to push on. And it is changing. We've got the squad, we've got more people coming. Seeing the Pew Research that more Democrats are saying, this isn't okay. This is Trumpian, what you're allowing to be done. And if we are going to cleanse what was done under Trump, this has to be a part of it. This has to be at the top of the list of what we're doing. We also defend the right to boycott for BDS. And we fight back on any legislation that's put forth to try to make BDS illegal. We saw that at this national level, it was being blocked, and so states started doing their own little things, including in Wisconsin. We have to keep our eye on what's happening across the country, because when there is pushback at the national level, we see efforts, APAC trying to do things then at the local level, doing it through Republican channels and having them push for it. We also work to fight all forms of white nationalism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, racism. We work in coalition and in conjunction with all movements for freedom and justice for all people. There are no exceptions to that. And we really want our elected officials to know that their constituents support Palestinian rights. So things that are recently happened, there was a letter started by Representatives Tlaib Rashid and Mark Pocan, and then it had 10 co-signatories to the Secretary of State Blinken, calling for a United States policy that'll work for human rights and dignity for Palestinians, and to turn away from the harmful policies that were put forth by the Trump administration. It calls on Israel to vaccinate all Palestinians under their military control and occupation, and calls on the United States to oppose the expansion of illegal Israeli settlements on Palestinian land. There was also a similar letter in the Senate that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren initialed. So we are hoping that there's going to be some movement forward. Again, maybe not this year. I hope it's not 10 years. I hope it's much sooner than that, because there are lives at stake. Injustice cannot continue, and we have to call attention to this. And I really hope that we can get more Jews to become Jews for peace instead of just follow whatever happens in Israel. And that number is growing. We're seeing a generational shift. And thank you again for having me. And I am eager to do whatever I can to help Milwaukee coalesce and to help the state coalesce around moving our senators and representatives to really hold Israel accountable. And just a little interesting thing, before it was JVPA and it was JVP and we were a C3 and we would just go visit all the representatives that we could, there were no Republicans that we visited. It was just like beyond the pale that we would do it. And it has turned into such a partisan issue that we were hopeful that we would get Democrats to sign on and to be a stronger voice against what's happening. And again, we're hoping that more will sign on this year. Thank you.
Could you say something? Did Tammy Baldwin sign on to the Sanders and Warren? No.
No, she did not. No. And when I met with Tammy and I've talked to her about these things, she's kind, she's wonderful, I love her. She said, yeah, there's bad things happening. She visited Bethlehem, but they also flipped to the false comparisons that, well, Palestinians are doing bad things too. It is the false equivalencies that have to be shot down, and we need a stronger voice, and they are here. They get so much. I mean, money is a big part of it. You know, the strong power of APAC and where they get their funding from, and being afraid really to stand up for Palestinians and to stand up against Netanyahu and what Israelis are doing. And I've been an elected. I know that money is kind of, but I'm looking for, what is that word? Profiles and courage. But this shouldn't be that big of a deal. This is just, it's justice. And what everyone said, if they can fight for it at the US border, if they can fight for it in other areas, why can't they fight for it for Palestinians?
Most definitely. And it sounds like we have some work to do with our elected officials on
Yes.
this topic. So we need to get a group of people from Peace Action to visit Tammy Baldwin and Gwen Moore. Yeah. Sorry, but I don't think I'm going to want to visit Ron Johnson.
No. But I always whenever there is an election and an open seat, and this is where I'm bringing my political background, you can't endorse as a C3, but you can ask questions, and you can hold them, you can ask the tough questions, and they are more vulnerable to answering them when they're running for office, where they're running for re-election, when they're running for election. These are questions that have to start being asked to anyone who runs for office, and for any opponents of Ron Johnson, for anyone who runs against anyone. How do they feel about these issues? And what will they do if they're elected to support justice for Palestinians?
Well, Peace Action Wisconsin will do everything we can to work with Jewish Voice for Peace on this issue.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to put this open for discussion. If people have questions, maybe just raise your hand or speak up. I see Julie.
Yes, I think it was 2 or 3 summers ago, Gwen Moore, who I'm also a good friend of, gave me a call and said, I'm bringing Keith Ellison to town. And Keith was in Congress at the time, and he was very strong in Palestinian. I believe he is Palestinian. I believe he is. And
Keith Ellison?
or he's a Muslim.
He's Muslim. He's actually, no, he's African American. He's Muslim though.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
But he wanted to meet with some people who would be supportive of Palestinian rights. So Gwen asked me to have a gathering in our backyard. Well, Janan, you and Najeeb, you and your husband were there, and a number of people. We had about 35 people. And the main message that I heard from both Keith Ellison and Gwen Moore, who we've been working with off and on this for many years, was that they don't hear from anybody on this. That was what they kept saying. We don't hear from people on this issue. You've got to be on our backs on this in order for us to be able to show other people. We've gotten this number of letters. We've gotten this number of phone calls. This is an important issue for our constituents in Wisconsin or from Minnesota or wherever. And so it turned the tables kind of on us as constituents, that we really had to do more work on our end. And that we can't just lay the blame on them doing more. So I would just want to say that for everybody who's tuned in tonight, we really do need to let our elected officials know how we feel on this issue. It's very important that they are nagged about it.
We do.
They
And
have so many issues. What? Yes. They have so many issues dealing with that this can get it to be the bottom of the heap if you don't get on them and have it pulled onto the top of the heap.
one of the problems is when we've met with Congresswoman Moore, she seems incredibly sympathetic, and her Milwaukee staff is. It's getting the Washington staff
Yes.
to move ahead. Yeah, I mean, we just run into roadblocks there.
Many issues, that's the case.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Sandy, with her Washington staff, there are members of her Washington staff who are incredibly sympathetic, but then the decision maker is, and
Chris.
we all know who that is.
Yes.
So the word on the street is, and what in fact her staff here in Milwaukee has said is that, well, he's kept her safe. You know, well, okay, so we understand. I guess if you're in office and you're, and you see how some people have been just totally maligned, that can be problematic. But going back to even what Julie said about talking and speaking, and I think we do make calls. I think we do send emails, but it's not in the sort of how can I say, organizational manner that some of these like federations that will take their entire staffs to Washington, D.C. and they will spend all that time in Washington, D.C. And this is an ongoing basis, you know. We're individuals. These are sometimes big, well-funded organizations with a single issue, you know. So, but that's not to stop us. I do think that we can organize and on a consistent basis, you know, make plans to visit all of these elected officials. And I'm probably also an outlier here in the sense that, yeah, I don't think we're going to get very far with people like Ron Johnson or my rep, Grothman. I'm sorry, I'm embarrassed, but anyhow, but at the same time, you know what? If they never hear from us, that's not a good thing. I still think let them close the door in our face, but let's constantly knock on the door. I really think that we, you know, at least they'll know that we're there. I just believe it's important for us to still be involved.
We do have an opportunity for folks that want to make calls to Congress this Wednesday, March 31st, 11 a.m. Central, in coalition, Adalah Justice Project with JVP Action and a coalition of groups called Invest in Justice. We are hosting an event about medical apartheid from the US to Palestine. As many of you have seen in reporting, Israel is being touted as having, you know, this amazing vaccination plan, that restaurants are back and open. Meanwhile, Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza are being denied the vaccine. And so we're going to have an amazing rally. It's really a conversation and a call to action this Wednesday. And the last 10 minutes of this hour-long event, there will be a tool where people can look up their members of Congress, and we'll spend time together calling and we'll have the script ready for you to ask that your member of Congress speak out against Israel's denial of the vaccine to Palestinians. It's very simple that, you know, we are in a global pandemic. We are only as safe as the most vulnerable among us, and Israel can't continue this system of racism. It's making us all less safe. So I hope you will join us. Please, you know, that second link will work, and then share the event and make sure that people know about it.
And we will put that on our website for everyone, and be sure everybody sees that and take part. Yes.
One other thing is that I think there's a fear of repercussions. The Jewish Federation is very strong. The Jewish Chronicle will come out and say negative things about Gwen Moore if she should do something. So we also need to be the other side. We have to thank the representatives for what they're doing. I had a brief chat with Mark Pocan, and he said, yeah, it's an uphill stream, but we want him to know that we have his back, that we will help get the current going in the other direction so the stream uphill isn't quite so difficult. And I think that would help give a lot of the people who are sort of on the edge more courage to do what's right.
That's a
Can I
good
ask a
point.
question?
Well, Samira is next. I'll put
Okay.
you on the stack, and then Mary, and then Christy.
Okay.
Samira.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for the presentation. A few comments maybe to throw out there. And Sandy, thanks for picking up on the idea of the obstacles, so that we don't single out the Palestine movement or Palestinians for lack of work or for lack of showing up. From what Janan said about being in the movements, progressive movements or justice movements, As far as I'm concerned, Palestinians, and I'm not Palestinian, I'm Lebanese, but I grew up in Little Palestine in Beirut, or Palestine town, which was wonderful. So just to clarify, and I'll ask Sandra and Janan as a Palestinians to comment, and you were born here and I wasn't. The Palestinian and generally the Lebanese are new generation in the United States. So this idea of being active and stuff, it took a younger generation to get here. And you can see it. Just like Jewish Voice for Peace, I go to a Jewish Voice for Peace conference. The young folks are ruling. I mean, it's incredibly energetic and fun and creative. Same thing if you go to Arab conferences, it's pro-Palestinian conference, U.S. campaign to end the Israeli, what is it called now? The U.S. campaign for Palestinian rights. It's all full of young folks, by the way, Arabs and Jews and Palestinians. So there is a difference. This idea that Gwen Moore needs to hear from us is a little cowardice, I have to say, because they should know who's in power, who's got power, who's new to this country. It's like going to 306 and say, oh, we don't hear from you. You know, going to people sitting in jail, oh, we don't hear from you. We don't need reform in the legal, in the justice system. So again, also, just so people who don't know, the Palestinians who got ethnically cleansed from Palestine were a force of progressiveness and liberalism throughout the Arab countries, including in Lebanon, who is known for its openness. But it is the Palestinians who brought up all of these ideas. So even though it may not have shown in the United States here, but it existed. They had tons of civil society movements, tons of women's civil society movements, and so on and so forth. They taught us liberalism and progressiveness, so that we don't get an idea that Palestinian movement is new to justice. When Nelson Mandela got out, one of the very few first leaders he met with are Palestinian leaders. Why? Because as a whole, the Palestinian movement stood with liberation of everyone, specifically of liberation in Africa, including the liberation of the Kurds, the Armenians. I grew up in Lebanon. We had everything. And they would get trained and they would come, and then conferences. So Palestinian activism existed. It may not have been as visible because it doesn't have the resources and so on. And we're still there. We don't have the resources. Sorry for the long opinion here. But let me throw out this possibly different view on legislative work. I think it should be done, but I don't think we should put our eggs in that basket. If I have 10 hours to give, it should be maybe half an hour to call, to work on Gwen Moore. 9.5 hours should be spent elsewhere. One reason is it's too late for us to make a difference, because even Blacks are not making difference. I mean, not Blacks are getting justice in Congress. So many things are not getting justice in Congress. It's no longer what it was 30 years ago or whatever, where we could make a difference. And I did my share of, even with Sensenbrenner, racist Sensenbrenner, who was racist in our face to Arabs. So I don't think that's one question. The other question is, we need to catch up on some things. Finally, JVP came out to be anti-Zionist specifically, openly anti-Zionist, with a very important statement that they worked on for many years. So now we have anti-Zionism, a growing movement of anti-Zionism who is not worried. And very importantly, just 2 months ago, the biggest human rights organization in Israel is Jewish led, and I add it's white Jewish led, because there are a lot of Jews of color that are also persecuted within Israel. It's white Jewish led, and they declared the system from the river to the sea, in other words, all of entire Palestine, apartheid, Jewish supremacy. So it's no longer we need to be talking. I think we need to catch up beyond the occupation. We need to start exactly build on something like a South Africa solution. Even if we don't go out to Gwen Moore and start talking this language, these 9.5 hours that I talked about earlier, and only half hour to Gwen Moore, is to present the apartheid system in historic Palestine, the apartheid system, and the solution of one equal rights to all with one person and one vote throughout the whole territory. All right, I'll stop. Sorry.
No, that was very good analysis. Thank you so much, Samir. Thank you.
Yes.
And now Mary?
Yes, I first of all want to thank everybody for speaking. I enjoyed you, Sandra, and Janan, and Sandy Pasch. But what I want to address really is, I mean, Janan, you really spoke about something that I think is very important, and you spoke very well, and that is basically, you made me think of the fact that we're all in a minority of some kind. The majority of the people in the world are in some kind of minority. We're Black, we're women, 52%. That makes us, you know, we're a minority. We're treated like a minority. And I think we should be considered that. Everybody is in a minority, and the big picture is that, therefore, most people have prejudice against them, and the only ones who don't are some white males. And this is so wrong. And we all have to get together somehow and not be prejudiced against each other. In other words, we have to get to know everybody. We have to get to know people personally and understand that most of them that we know are in the same boat we are. Most of us here have something that people are prejudiced about. If it's our age, if it's our sex, if it's our color, if it's anything. I mean, there are just so many prejudices, and we just have to really work personally on that as well as politically, because we can't be very good in politics if we don't really understand what's going on.
Thank you, Mary. Okay, we have a lot of questions. So it's Christy and then Tom.
Thanks. Okay, I'm glad Samir got to go before I did, because he said so much of what I wanted to ask about. First and foremost is that when I hear people talking about how our elected representatives don't speak up on this issue, don't take action on this issue because they don't hear enough from us, I have to say, what happened to the concept that I grew up believing in, which was the idea of political leaders? You know, what's wrong with the idea of leadership by our elected representatives? They should be telling us where our money is going and when that's wrong, when it should be switched, and they should be educating their constituents, not just tailing along behind us and waiting for us to force them in certain directions. So I was really glad to hear Samir say that what's wrong with expecting political elected leaders to actually lead. The other thing I wanted to ask is, Sandy said that, Sandy Pasch said that if Israel continues to receive funding from the United States, that we have to hold them accountable for the funds that they receive. And that kind of raised the question to me, what would be a correct thing for us to be giving them money to do? If we're going to give them money and hold them accountable for it, what would be a satisfactory thing for the government of Israel to be doing with the money sent to them by taxpayers in the United States? Or should we be demanding that we don't send them money at all? And that leads to another question, which is, if I do contact Gwen Moore and Tammy Baldwin, what should I be asking them to do? You know, specifically, what should our demands be on them in terms of their leadership in the United States government? What do I want my elected leaders to do to get justice for Palestine?
Let me answer that one real quick, and then other people maybe jump in. I don't think we should be sending any money to Israel. Okay, but sometimes you have to take baby steps in politics. So at least if we say, all right, do you know what they're doing with that money? There was the Leahy law that money was not supposed to be used in any way that broke international law. No one is holding Israel accountable. They're using that money to terrorize children, to lock them up, to torture them, to put them in solitary confinement. So we're trying to start with something as obvious as you can't use US dollars for children. So one of the first things that we should, US dollars to terrorize Palestinian children. So I think one of the first things to do, chipping away at that, again, I don't think there should be any money going there, but while there is money going there, let's at least say, can you at least make sure that our tax dollars aren't going to incarcerate Palestinian youth, that you're celebrating Jewish kids with a bar mitzvah, but a Palestinian child the same age is put in solitary confinement for just being. So that would be the small step. So this will be Betty McCollum's bill that will be a third time around. Let's see if we can't get her to sign on to it this time.
Thank you.
I just want to say too that, Keith Ellison saying that he doesn't hear from us is really laughable. And I agree with the analysis. I mean, Samir is absolutely right in that Palestinians have always been seen as radical. We're an anti-colonial people. We're seeking liberation. So it's not, it's not a surprise, right, that we are seen as a target or as a danger to authoritarian and settler colonial regimes like the US, like Israel. I mean, we're treated outside the norm for a reason. And we do spread radical ideas. I mean, I don't want to give the impression that the work that Adalah Justice Project is doing today is new, because always the Palestinian issue has been one of transnationalism, has been, Yasser Arafat was the one that was reaching out to, third world colonial movements. And when Palestinians came to the US, especially, after the 1967 war, they had huge impacts on leftist politics in this country, many of them coming from socialist parties in the region. My daughter is a junior at Earlham College, and she just took a labor history course and wrote a great paper about the United Auto Workers strike at the Chrysler plant, the Wildcat strike that the Palestinians took against the union because they were invested in Israeli bonds. So just to say that we're building, right? We're building on a long legacy of radical politics, and that I'm also if you had told me, even just 3-4 years ago that I was going to be doing work on Capitol Hill, I would have laughed at you. I do believe that it has to start at the grassroots. We don't go to Capitol Hill without power. We go to Capitol Hill in coalition. And we're not only advocating when we go to these offices saying you need to support, no way to treat a child. We're saying unlock the cages at the border. We're saying pass the Breathe Act, which is, an amazing piece of legislation that's come out of for the movement for Black lives to really, bring reparations back to communities. So, all to say that, we know that we can't move Congress. We want better people in Congress. So, I don't know your representatives, but I say primary them. That's the only way we're going to have better politics.
Yes, agreed. Okay, Tom, did you have a question?
Yeah, a couple of quick thoughts. One was, where do we go from here? And I guess the thing that I want to talk about and have people consider is back when I was really a lot more involved with peace action, we got a group of young Muslim girls and young Jewish girls together. And they wanted to have a discussion about what was going on. It was interesting, by the way. I was the only Christian in the room, but the goal was to try to communicate with each other. And I guess that sounds like what would be helpful right now, again, through a peace action or whoever, to start that kind of communications and see if there are young people in particular who are willing to get together from both sides and find a way to communicate and move forward together, because it's going to be them who are going to have to do it. So that's one thing I want to talk about. The second thing, having been in the legislature and taken some difficult votes and lose an election because of that, it's until you've been in and see yourself losing because of what you stood for, it gets interesting to talk from the outside. So those are the 2 points I want to make. But the goal I want to make first, most importantly, is how do we go from here? If this is just a one-night event, but it needs to be, and if Ms. Pasch, if there are some young Jewish girls, and Janan, if there are some young Muslim girls who can get together and start communicating with each other and then come with a united voice, it gets difficult for somebody like Gwen Moore. I mean, to us old people, she can say, you guys are, you're not there, you're not together. But if we can get young people together to communicate and come up with a policy together, then they can't say, oh, but the other side. And so it puts them in a spot where they have to think about it and maybe deal with it a little more seriously. So my suggestion is, and I got to talk to Christy about this and Pam, but we need to start a Muslim Jewish committee at Peace Action to start this kind of negotiations and discussion and united front. So that's my speech.
Thank you, Tom. Great idea. Create a Muslim Jewish discussion group.
I have to jump in. I'm sorry. I do appreciate the longing for action, and I applaud that. Palestinians have been very clear. They're asking for campaigns around boycott, divestment, and sanctions. So I would steer you in that direction to think about a target that's very unique to Milwaukee, to develop a campaign around and to build coalitions around. While I understand the impetus for creating dialogue groups, I would caution against any kinds of programs that are going to reinforce the idea that this is a religious issue. I'm not Muslim. I'm Palestinian. I'm Christian. This is not a religious issue. I don't stand, for Palestinian rights because of my faith. And I stand for Palestinian rights because I believe that everybody is equal and we're all humans. And so I don't want anyone to think that there's a religious claim to land, or that this is a long-standing, primordial conflict that dates back to the, beginnings of our faith traditions. This is a settler colonial project that was started in the 20th century. and has been going on for 100 years tops, so it's not about religion.
Well, I have to agree, because I'm working on divestment campaign for Don't Bank on the Bomb, but we're also going to be working on divest from the war machine. And maybe we need to include including what you brought up about investing in Israeli bonds and other corporations that make money for the Israelis. So yeah, I think that's a great idea. And since I'm working on that anyway, I think I would like to incorporate that and bring that awareness to my people that I'm working on those other campaigns. So thank you for that.
Can I?
Yes,
sorry.
Janan, please.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to jump in and ditto 100% what Sandra said, because I think that has actually been the problem. Whereas Tom, I completely understand where you're coming from, and the idea of creating coalitions, but I think that this is also what, to some extent, has been used against us, in the sense of saying that, oh, well, they've been fighting for thousands of years. Well, no, they have not been fighting for thousands of years. Palestinian Jews and Christians and Muslims have always lived together for centuries. And the idea that, well, it's this is, well, they just need to sit down and talk it out. No, they don't. There's a difference in power. You don't just sit down and talk it out. This is about justice and injustice. It's very simple. It's not a complicated thing. You just can't say that there's, just simply because of your ethnicity, that somehow you should have more human rights than somebody else. It's as simple as that. And I think that if we keep going and taking this discussion and narrative every time it's thrown at us in some way, and bringing it back to simplify it and say, no, that's not what it's about. It's about what's unjust, and preventing this kind of oppression and injustice. And I think I really agree with Sandra that this is really where we have to take it.
Well, the Israelis are colonized people too, whether they realize it or not. Isn't every child who becomes of age drafted into the military? I would not want to have my child drafted into a military. So they're oppressed too. And so anyway, that's just something I wanted to talk about a little bit. And does anybody want to talk about that?
Yeah, can I?
Yes, Samir.
So in terms of, Sandra and Janan and Sandy, we're in Milwaukee, but national organizations have helped us, guide us on what to do. There are national organizations, JVP Action, JVP, Palestinian organizations, Adalah, U.S. campaign. There is something they're telling us to do. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel. The question is, what would work for Milwaukee, given the history of Milwaukee, of attacks on film festivals, like the Muslim Film Festival, on Gwen Moore telling you, oh yeah, we sympathize, but nothing is done. That's because there's something working to prevent this story to come up. And we all know Milwaukee has a strong mainstream, or what JV could call it, legacy Jewish organizations that are strong. And JVP obviously is not one of them. Going to organize, people like John Lewis in Atlanta wouldn't meet with us for a reason. Gwen Moore didn't meet with JVP. She sent the staff member. So we know what to do. We've been, there are directions we are being given by organizations and action calls to action and so on. So it's just to to understand what would work for us in Milwaukee, because we are not Chicago. Chicago, they have like a coalition of folks that are working together, from AFSC to JVP to AAAN and so on and so forth. And it's the biggest Palestinian community in the United States. So what would work for Milwaukee is one question that I would put there.
And I just don't see those groups here. So
but I think we can create them. I truly do. It's going to take work. It's going to take a lot of work. But just a story from a few years ago, there was a young man from Never Again Is Now, from Milwaukee, who went to help build a road, thinking this was in Gaza, and he was attacked, and it was on video. And I tried to get the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel to cover it. They eventually did. It took months, but I remember meeting with the writer, and they said, "What's the angle here?" I was like, "What's the angle? There's a video of old people, of young people who are building a road, being beaten up. Someone from Milwaukee who went there, who was beaten up, who had a concussion, who was still healing months later." And they ask, "What's the story? What's the angle?" It isn't, as Mark Pocan said, it's uphill or upstream or whatever, but that doesn't mean it's not doable and it's not possible, and that with more voices together we can't do it. And it's been a tough year with COVID. I think everyone's been, just many of us anyway, on just trying to stay healthy. But we're hopefully coming out of it, and it's a chance where we can get together, maybe virtually and then eventually together, to show that there are many of us, but we speak with one voice.
I think, Sandy, if I recall correctly, if my memory doesn't, I believe even the young man was Jewish, the one that was attacked, and he was trying to get the Jewish Chronicle to cover it. They did not cover it. So I do recall that. But going with the idea of what we can do, I think I have to go back to sort of what I said at the beginning about us really allying and joining forces with all of these other minority groups that are also working for justice. I think that, you know, again, if Janan goes into Gwen Moore's office, yes, they'll kindly listen to me, but probably not pay attention. You know, if Janan goes in and brings in people from Voces de la Frontera, and we bring in, you know, from numerous Black Lives Matter and from the AAPI, you know, the Asian community, and we go in, then suddenly we're representing 20 different organizations, then people are going to listen to you. We just have to start thinking really strategically. We have to think about working together in a way that's strategic and going in not just for one issue, but for principles, standing up for principles.
That's very, very true. Are there any, Samir, did you want to say something else, or was your hand just still raised? Well, would anybody like to make closing comments? It's almost 8:30 and I think we're about done. It's getting late.
Can I say one more thing, Pam?
Of course.
Thank you. Okay. I've noticed that in response to some of the latest racist attacks that we've been witnessing, some people have been saying that in Wisconsin, and particularly in response to Ron Johnson's attitude, that Wisconsin should call a big statewide anti-racism rally. And I've said, great idea. I worry about rallies in the era of COVID, but I think maybe it is something that this talk tonight even points to, is that we really need to have a strong stand, a strong show from many different organizations that we stand together against racism and for justice for everybody. So maybe Peace Action can and should take the lead in that, and calling for some kind of a demonstration that would address all the racist hate that we've been seeing lately across the country and just across the board. So I don't know, I'm just throwing that out there. Maybe we should, maybe as a leader myself, maybe I should put my money where my mouth is and say, maybe we should take the lead and sponsor something like this. That's it.
Okay, thanks. Well, thank you very much, everyone who came, and thank you for our speakers. And this isn't the end of it. I think we're going to work closely with Jewish Voice for Peace and also follow what the Adalah Justice Project is doing. And we'll be sure to get people at 11 a.m. Wednesday, March 31st. And I will put that out on our Peace Action calendar and send it to everybody so we can all attend. So thank you very much. Good night, everybody.
Thank you,
Pam.
everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
So Pam, next time we'll set up a different number,
Okay.
but yeah, no problems, except for
Yeah.
muting.
Yeah.
And it should be on YouTube. It's on our YouTube channel right now, so
Oh, great.
you should be able to promote it.
I
But
can
yeah,
put it- we could, maybe you can help me make a link for it that we can put on our calendar. on our
well,
website.
save the chat. It's in the chat. If you just, you know how to save the chat yourself.
Yeah, if I can find it. There it is.
All right. Good night, everyone. Hey, Bruce.
Good
Hey.
night.
Night.
Good night.
Good night.
All
All right, you want me to shut the lights off, guys?
Sure.
Okay. Good night.
Thank you.